Okay, our next step in working with acrylic paint is to start working with the idea of value, or the concept of value in artwork. We're going to start down here with our value scale. And you have to sort of first decide where your color falls in that value scale. So if we look at a color wheel, we can see that the color, when we put a color wheel with the yellow at the top and the violet at the bottom, we are lining colors up with something called their inherent value. Yellow is naturally a lighter color than any of the rest of the colors on the color wheel. And so the colors that we mix with yellow, like yellow, orange, and yellow, green, are also going to be naturally lighter. As we move into some of the secondary colors, we end up with some of our mid values, and then down into our purples, we end up with the darker values. So when we're going to make a value scale in paint, we have to think about what's the inherent or the beginning value of the color that we're working with. So if I were going to make a value scale and shade my shapes using the yellow, for instance, because yellow is such a light value to begin with, I'm not going to be able to make it much lighter with white. Maybe 2 steps whiter than it already is. So that means I'm going to put my yellow down here on the value scale. I'll make 3 lighter versions of yellow, and I will make 6 darker versions of yellow, being very careful about adding my black because it will be very easy to get it too dark too fast. If I'm using the blue, my color is already quite dark, especially considering that we're working with ultramarine blue. And so my blue is going to be at the opposite side. Where I thought I'd put my yellow down here, I'm going to put my blue here. I'm only going to be able to darken the blue 2 or 3 times before it's as dark as it can go, but I am going to be able to lighten it many, many times. It's actually possible to do a value scale with the blue and not have to add black at all. We are going to do it so that we add a little black. And really the red is the one that sits kind of closest to the center. It's a more middle value tone of red. And so I should be able to evenly lighten and darken that color. So it's important for you as you choose your color to think about where does it fall in terms of light to dark, just in its inherent, or the value just sort of built in to the paint itself. We have white paint, which is really different from watercolor, and black. So we will actually lighten the paint with white paint. We're going to paint the value scale portion in first. So like I talked about before, or if you remember from watercolor, we're going to start with just the color of the paint. So you can see I'm working carefully with my paintbrush. If you guys have the bigger brushes, you do want to just work to control that. Remember, a big brush, the great thing about it is you get kind of 2 brushes in one. I get this wide brush and I get this tiny brush, just depending on how I use it. So I'm going to have to try to focus on using a tiny brush direction. I am then going to scoop up and move a little pile of paint, fairly sizable pile of paint actually, because I want to kind of try to build on the paint pile rather than make a bunch of different paint piles. So I'm going to first just take a tiny bit of white and add it to the pile and make a red that's just the tiniest bit lighter than the original red. And I'm going to put that red next to the first red. I'm going to turn my sheet just because I'd rather paint a little bit sideways. I am then going to repeat that process, and I'm going to grab a tiny bit more white. If I don't see a change out here in my color pile, I know that I need to grab just a little bit more of the white. I'm trying to make really gradual steps as I make my value changes. There, I see that I made that different now. So that's a little bit lighter again. I'm going to do the same thing. Grab a little bit more of that white paint. So you see, if I'm careful about doing my value steps really gradually, I would be able to make lots and lots of value changes to the same color. I have to just be careful each time not to grab too much of the new color that I'm adding in. Oh, that's pretty much the same color, so I'm going to grab more white. So remember too, as you mix, you're mixing in paint that's still in your paintbrush. And you can see now, as I've had to add white several times, we talked about white not having a lot of blending power or a lot of mixing power, and you can see that I had to add white several times to get this nice lighter color. What I'm going to do now is just grab some white and move it into a new pile on my palette, and I'm just going to mix the red that's in my paintbrush with that new white paint in the hopes of making lighter. I still have yet to achieve a lighter pink. One more. So you can see that there's a reason most of the time when we work with lightening paint, we're going to start with white and gradually add the color. It is really hard to get white to lighten a color, and I'm not even working with a super dark color. So there we go, my light side of the value scale. I now have to start over, and I'm going to paint, do the same process using my black paint. So I'm cleaning my paintbrush out just like we talked about yesterday. I'm kind of bouncing the brush along the bottom of my bowl. I am going to then kind of scrape it dry on the edge of the bowl and squeeze it dry with my paper towel so that I don't get a lot of water in my paint. And now I'm going to do that exact, like I said, same process. I'm going to scoop and move a pile of red paint. So some of you yesterday, as we switched to acrylic, were having trouble getting enough paint on your paintbrush when you move to mix. I am going to move it to a new spot here on my palette. And I am going to take the tiniest bit of black. Now, white doesn't lighten very fast. Black darkens rather too fast. And I probably, with just that little tiny corner of black in my paintbrush, already know that I have too much black in this pile of paint. So I'm going to move my paintbrush over here and kind of stop mixing in some of the black. I want nice gradual steps in value change, and so I am not wanting to make that be much darker than that. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to see how much more black I have in my paintbrush, or even how much more black I have in this pile. Because I think if I keep mixing this black in, I have my next darker color already. But I can paint that on my paper and I can see. And nope, they're exactly the same. So I'm going to need to come back and grab just a little bit more black and add that into my pile. And you can see that my pile of red suddenly is all the way black. That's too far, too fast. So I'm going to move back over here. There, I got a little bit darker than the last time. So it's really easy for the black to take over, and I want to make sure that that doesn't happen. I want to go as gradual as possible as I shift to the darker and darker tones. So if you grab black paint and mix it into your pile and your paint just goes all the way black, you need to back up, okay? It's not one of those, oh, well, it got too dark, I'm going to paint it on there anyway. It's now we have to fix it. There we go. I've got my next darker tone, and I have made a value scale using red. So this is the first step in working on this light logic sheet, is to paint your value scale, deciding where your color belongs on the scale, and lightening it and darkening it as you need to.